show. Thanks for being here.
I'm stoked to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Right away, I would just like to ask you what mindset means to you.
Mindset is a way for you to figure out how to go for the things and do the hard things that you've always wanted to do. And mindset is something that it's a moving target. It's not this thing that all of a sudden now I'm positive or now I'm confident. It's something that you always have to work on. And mindset is a form of mastery.
Okay, cool. And I know obviously you do these long distance bike races. I've done my fair share of just like long hikes here and there, nothing to the extent where your mindset would be challenged to the point where yours has. But I'm very curious, when you're in those long 100-mile races, like what is the self-talk in your head, and what's that journey or roller coaster like?
I think that the things that you go through in long races are applicable to daily life. And that's why mountain bike racing or whatever it is that people are doing to challenge themselves is a great master class to apply to daily life, because the things that I learn, that I've learned on the bike are things I practice every single day. The first thing that comes to mind is whenever things are going well, you have to play to win instead of playing not to lose. And that's a really hard thing to do. And even when things aren't going well, you need to play to win, because if you're thinking about playing not to lose, you're going to be tight, so to speak. You're going to be doing things from a defensive standpoint, and you're not going to be acting from a state of abundance. And the way that you start doing things, it's like a tennis player. I played tennis growing up. If you're winning the match, if you're almost winning the match and you're on match point and you're like, I just got to win this point, you start playing tight. So learning how to kind of relax into what you're trying to do and trying to be on the offensive and on the confident end instead of being afraid of what you're going to lose. And that also ties into this thing of focusing on the process instead of the outcome. Because if you're playing to win or playing to lose, you really care about winning and losing, and that does matter to some degree. But really, at the end of the day, it's committing to what your daily actions are. And the race itself is just the icing on the cake. It's the things that you do every day to get yourself ready for the race. And that's where the real lessons lie. It's showing up when you don't feel like showing up and building that integrity with yourself. And confidence comes from building trust in yourself that you are actually going to follow through with the things that you said that you're going to do. And it's also not giving up, whether that's on race day, whenever things are hard. Like there are days things that don't actually go well. And that's how it is in daily life too. Sometimes things get out of hand and your schedule gets off, or you had a meeting that you were hoping would go a certain way and it doesn't, and the outcome isn't what you wanted. But it's about getting back up and standing up every time something knocks you down and saying, I'm going to keep going and I'm not going to give up.
So let's say you're like, what's going on in your head when you're in those low moments though? Do you know what I mean? Like it does go up and you're having an amazing time. Like for instance, I just went on this long hike these past couple days, and it was a ride where on the way up I noticed there was almost a difference in belief at one point, where at one point I was like, this is hard. My backpack's 45 pounds, and I was focusing on the negative side. Right. But then once I started looking at it as, oh, wow, I'm actually pushing my capabilities and I didn't know I was capable of this, then my mindset switched and I was a lot happier throughout the hike. So I guess, do you have any sort of tricks or ways to get yourself out of that negative space, or do you just kind of like sit in it and let it flow?
Yeah, and that's a really great point that you made, is choosing to focus on the things that are going well instead of choosing to focus on the things that aren't going well. And in positive psychology, that's called choosing your explanatory style. So if it's raining and you have a hike or a bike ride or a run and you're like, oh, I don't want to go out in the rain. I don't want to get cold. I don't want to get wet. Like, why is it always rain on the weekend? Like, you start going down this negative path. That's one way you're choosing to tell yourself a story about something that's happening. Or you could say, it's raining. It's going to smell so fresh. I'm going to have an adventure. It's going to be fun to get out there. It's not going to be crowded. Like whatever the positive things you can tell yourself about the thing that is actually the fact. So choosing a positive explanatory style is exactly what you did, and it's super helpful. But there are times where it is really hard to just quote, be positive. And sometimes you can't just pull yourself out of this negative mindset. So one thing that I like using is a technique from meditation called thought labeling. And in meditation, that's how you practice, right? Meditation is the practice for daily life. You can practice this without, quote, sitting on your cushion, but meditation helps you bring awareness to the thoughts that are coming into your head. So whenever you give thoughts power, that's whenever they start taking off. So if you're out on your hike and you're like, gosh, I'm getting a blister and this hurts, and when is the top coming? Instead of trying to change it, you could just be aware that you're thinking it and label it like thought. You could just say the word thought to yourself. And every time the little spiraling starts coming up and the rumination starts coming up, you say thought. Or like if you're practicing this in a meditation, my mind always goes to planning. So I'm sitting there and I'm doing a meditation and I'm like, oh, I should answer this email, or I got to do the laundry. And so then I just label it like planning. Or so you can take your thought and you can create even more specific labels for that thought if it's helpful for you. So another example would be like, I do long races, and whenever I'm getting close to the finish line, I start thinking about the finish line and I just want to be at the finish line. And it doesn't matter how long the race is. It isn't until I get close to the finish line that I start thinking that. So I just tell myself like thought, or like be here now, or even using mantras to try to keep yourself in the present moment without thinking about the story you're telling yourself about the thought. And when things get really bad, when you just want to quit, when you're totally miserable, and this happens to everybody, it's realizing that that's not going to last, and thinking about how your future self would feel if you quit. How is it going to feel in 5 hours or 5 days when you know that you quit when it got hard? How's it going to feel in 5 hours or 5 days when you know that you were able to continue pushing through and you didn't quit? And knowing that that feeling isn't going to last forever. That also goes for positive, happy, successful feelings as well. But kind of detaching from this feeling of it's going to be like this forever will help you move through, because you realize, I've actually told myself this too, near the end of a race, if I'm starting to feel bad, or even at the beginning, is in 5 hours or 8 hours, I'm going to be sitting at the finish line having a beer with my friends. And this intense moment is just going to be a distant memory. So I just need to keep moving forward.
Interesting. And that's really profound. I mean, was that something that evolved as your bike career evolved, or did you have a sports psychologist helping you the whole time, or have you always just been this positive person, or?
I've mostly been, so 50% of our personality is genetic. And being a positive person has been something that I do think I am pre-wired to do, but our brains can be rewired. So becoming more positive is actually something you can train, as is confidence. So what I started doing was I would be telling stories about my races and about things I overcame. And people would always say to me like, wow, how are you so positive? Or how did you not quit? And I thought to myself, I'm not really sure. So I started trying to reverse engineer, how was I doing all these things? And then I started doing my own self-study into positive psychology and mindfulness and mindset. And on top of that, a few years ago, it was for a shorter period of time, I was working with a sports psychologist, and I actually would like to maybe work with her again in the future. But it was interesting because we didn't actually work on the sports psychology piece. We worked on the daily life piece, because who we are in our daily life is who we are out on the playing field. And there's lots of things in our daily lives that can affect how we show up on the playing field, can affect our training. And the biggest lesson I learned from the sports psychologist was about energy management. We're always trying to manage our time. Like, I got to get this in my calendar, or how am I going to balance my time? But really we should be looking at how we balance our energy, because there's so many different inputs in our lives. And if you're an athlete, you need every single bit of energy you can to train and to recover. But if you're exhausted from working tons of hours, having a kid, having relationship stress, whatever those things may be, and you're not equipped to deal with those things in your daily life, you're not going to be able to show up and give it your all in this other thing that requires mind, body, and spirit. So learning how to manage energy has been the most important thing that I've learned from the sports psychologist, and being able to, we can't train in a vacuum, knowing that all of these things on the outside affect everything else. So you can apply that to whatever you're doing. If you're fatigued from emotionally fatigued or mentally fatigued, that's going to affect you in other places as well.
So, I mean, it seems like you've got a lot going on. You're a new mom, you're an entrepreneur, you're a professional mountain biker. So what do you do to manage that energy?
I think it's what I do to recover.
Okay.
I do be very careful and intentional with how I spend my time. And people say, well, find balance, but I find intentional imbalance. So I choose, like, on certain days, this is how I'm going to sway and put all my energy into something. I'm going to work harder in this area. On other days or parts of the day, I'm going to be putting my energy into this area. And it's like having different buckets and making sure that you fill the self-care bucket too. So that's how I recharge my energy, is I make sure that I know what my priorities are. And it's really hard because sometimes we say my priorities are XYZ, but then if you actually look at your actions, you might be doing something different than what those priorities actually are. So I actually did an audit recently to say, are my priorities in line with what I'm saying they are? And my number one priority has to be my son. But my number two priority is actually my sleep. And that might come as a surprise to people because sleep is something that it seems like, well, you could just give up sleep to get an extra hour here or there. But if you aren't rested, and rest is like being able to get good sleep is the foundation to everything. It's how your brain recovers. It's how your body recovers. It's how you stay healthy and not get sick. So that's kind of the base of the pyramid of my self-care, is after I've taken care of my son, I make sure that I'm getting extra sleep. And sometimes that means I'll train a little bit less or I'll work a little bit less. And the third priority is my relationships and my nutrition. And sometimes those can go hand in hand, which are why they're on the same level. Like you can cook or eat or go grocery shopping or whatever with your friends or your partner, because having good health is going to help you do the other things well, which are work and training. So you would think that my work and my training would be number one priority, but they're actually on the lower end of my priorities. But that doesn't mean that they're not important. So that's how I manage my energy and manage my time.
Yeah, I like that. And it kind of rings true for me because I guess the funny and ironic thing is, yeah, I have a business called the 6 a.m. Work Shirts, and I have a podcast called the 6 a.m. Mindset Podcast. And I have people ask me, like, do you wake up at 6 a.m. every day? And like, the honest truth is no, because I mean, I bartend at night sometimes, and then I'm off late. And my biggest priority is not waking up at 6 a.m. It's sleep and health, because I do believe, like you said, that in order to be successful with my company, I need to be at a higher tier of mental clarity, which comes from all that, so. That's really interesting.
Many people give up their health for their wealth.
Yeah.
And then then you have all this wealth, but you have no health, and then you get sick and die. So, yeah, and then you're like, what was the point of all of that?
Yeah, no kidding. That's interesting. And you talked a little bit about nutrition. I know you are very openly a vegan athlete. Is that correct?
I call myself plant-based because vegan has a lot of, I think vegans are awesome, and I don't actually do all the things that vegans do from the full on lifestyle standpoint, but I don't consume any animal products.
Okay. Gotcha. And what got you started there? Like, I know I've had my own gut health problems in my life, and that's kind of what has caused me to eat a healthier diet and be more educated on a subject. But then I talk to certain people who just don't necessarily care about gut health and stuff. And I think that maybe it's not because or maybe it's because they haven't had issues, like, did something push you there, or what was the catalyst that made you want to go plant-based?
I love that you brought up gut health, because now I get to talk about my friend's book. Nice. It's called Fiber Fueled, and the guy's name that wrote the book, his name is Dr. Will Bolsowitz, and he's a gastroenterologist, and he's actually been on my podcast twice to talk about gut health. So you should check that out. But for me, it was in 2012. I was at BC Bike Race, which is a 7-day mountain bike stage race that starts in Vancouver. And at the time I was living in Colorado. And I met my now husband at that race, and he was eating a plant-based diet. And I was really confused how he was able to eat that and still perform on the bike. And he told me, hey, you should check out this documentary, Forks Over Knives, because eating this way means that you're going to prevent lots of diseases or reverse diseases that have already started in your body. And I thought, I didn't think that eating healthy foods was really that much of a deterrent for diseases. I thought that, if I eat healthy, I'll be able to perform on my bike. I won't have excess body fat, and I'll be a little bit healthier. I didn't realize that you can prevent and reverse heart disease, the number one killer of people in North America. You don't have to have high blood pressure, and high blood pressure is something that everyone in my family tends to get when they get older. And high blood pressure is not a disease of aging. High blood pressure happens whenever you get older, up all the time, and symptoms of it much later because it took all that time for you to build up those plaques. And you can reverse those with a whole foods plant-based diet. Lots of different types of cancers are attributed to animal products. And cancer was one of the things that I was really worried about because it seemed to be this thing that people just got, and you just got unlucky or you had bad genetics. But there's an incredible amount of research, and I recommend the website nutritionfacts.org. It's a nonprofit website where they have an entire team of people that go through all of the newest research that comes out, peer-reviewed medical journals, and they supply all the studies so you can read them for yourself, but telling you how to prevent and reverse a lot of these diseases, or if you have some of these diseases, things that you can do to mitigate those. So you could like go on there and you could type in gut health or whatever gut problems you're having. You could go in there and type in breast cancer. You can go in there and type in asthma, and you'll have access to all this great information. And I think with plant-based diets, people get worried because they think, well, I'm never going to be able to eat meat again. How am I going to give up my cheese forever? Mm-hmm. And while it is better to abstain from those things, just like bending in that direction, in the plant-based direction as much as you possibly can, is still going to have benefits for you. It's not just black and white. So if you can go like 80% plant-based, you're going to be far off, way better off than you would have been if you just went like 10% plant-based.
Yeah, no kidding. It's interesting because I find diet tends to have like so many parallels to mindset and life in general too, where there may be to a certain extent a short-term sacrifice in terms of the learning that you need to do, or the techniques in cooking to make it taste good, and the spicing here and there, or maybe some would even say flavor, you know, like you sacrifice some sort of flavor because you're used to a certain different type of flavor, you know, but that short-term sacrifice is so worth it in the terms of the long-term health, you know, like you said, like your daily practice contributes to the long-term or longevity of your athletic career, you know.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that you use the word sacrifice, because most people do view making changes as a sacrifice, but like, to me, and that's where you can use your mindset is, or your self-talk is like, this isn't a sacrifice, this is an opportunity. This is an opportunity for me to get to learn, and committing to a life of learning is an incredible and wonderful thing to do. And like, people think that they're sacrificing, they're never going to like the way their food tastes ever again. But when people come over to my house for plant-based meals, they want the recipe, and they'll often go buy the cookbook because the food was so good. And people tend to think that, well, now I have to give up enjoying my food, but really that's not the case. You just get the opportunity to change the way that you cook, and you can still make things that taste amazing.
Yeah, totally. That's cool. What would you say, out of everything you're juggling right now, what's your biggest challenge right now?
My biggest challenge is my drive and my ideas. And there's so many things that I want to do, and so many things I'm excited about and that I want to execute on. And I don't have the same amount of time that I once had to dedicate to that. And to be fair, burnout is real for many, many, many people. And just because you have all the time, I would work 12 hours a day if I could right now, because I love it. I absolutely love what I do, but that actually isn't healthy for you to work 12 hours a day. And I have done that before and burned myself out. So all of us have a drive. I mean, not everybody does, I guess, but a lot of people listening to this podcast probably are really driven people wanting to achieve great things. But making sure that you take the time to rest is going to help you have that long-term focus and health and excitement with what you're doing. So for me, how I'm doing all this is, you know, before COVID-19, we were planning to get a nanny so that I could continue to train and work and still spend time with my son, of course, but have more time. So now I've just had to find new ways to juggle. So like, my baby is in a lot of meetings with me. He doesn't join me in the podcasts, but he's often in Zoom meetings that I have, and that's just how it is. And I had to let go of what that looks like. Like, this is just how I have to do it. And then whenever I do get work done, he's taking a nap. So he's napping, I immediately have to start working. And it also means less time just less time to waste. Like I don't have any free time to waste.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also letting go of like the timeline for in which I want to get things done. And I'm lucky that I'm an entrepreneur. Like it'd be really a lot harder if I had an employer who had deliverables like you have to get this done by this date. But I get to choose the pace of my business. And I ask myself every day, is it like I'll catch myself trying to go on my phone or on my computer when he's awake. And I'll ask myself, is it worth trying to quote achieve more or move my business forward faster at the expense of not spending quality time with my son? What is going to be more important to me? And this goes back to what we talked about in the beginning of thinking about what my future self is going to think at that finish line. 5 hours, 5 days, how is that person going to feel with the thing that they're choosing to do right now? So it's really helped me keep perspective to say, well, if for 1 year or 2 years or whatever it is, I'm operating at 50% capacity of what I could be doing, is that going to be a problem long term? And for me, I've decided that it's not.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned earlier that you did like a self audit, and it sounds like you're very self aware. What is that audit process?
It's not like a formal process, but I check in with myself every day and every week. Like every day, how am I feeling? What are my intentions for the day? Every week, how did that week go? And I don't sit down and write it down. Many people do, and many people find a lot of benefit to having like a report card to score themselves at the end of the week. But yeah, for me, it's just, am I in line with my values? Am I doing the things that I said I'm going to do? And if things aren't going well, if I feel irritation or resentment or frustration, what is that coming from? And what need isn't being met if I feel that way? And then how can I address that?
Cool. I like that. Um, I want to ask you about your slogan, "Be brave, do epic shit." What brought that about, and how long has that been a slogan of yours?
Oh, it's been for quite some time. Yeah, probably like 10 years. It used to just be do epic shit. And
Okay.
it was funny because one of my sponsors at the time, I said, hey, let's design a sock together, like a pair of like athletic socks. And let's put do epic shit on it. And they said, well, we can't put a cuss word on a sock. And I said, we should put the cuss word on the sock and I think it'll sell. And it became their number one selling sock in the world.
Oh wow.
And since then, I've designed a lot of different socks, but I started my own company called Moxie and Grit, and we do have our own Do Epic Shit socks as part of my own company, Moxie and Grit. But Be Brave came about because being brave, it doesn't mean that you have to be like doing these crazy things. Being brave might just be being honest with yourself. It's really hard to be honest with yourself because you have to be humble in order to do that. And it's scary to look at yourself and say, maybe I don't know everything and maybe I do need some help. Or maybe I thought I was doing something right and now I wasn't doing it as right as I possibly was. Being brave is being vulnerable, and vulnerability, I think, is the key to building meaningful relationships. And a lot of people as adults, we say, well, how can I make, better friendships or deeper friendships? And both people have to be vulnerable in their relationship in order for it to grow. How can I be more vulnerable publicly? And it's scary to be vulnerable publicly because of imposter syndrome. But if you're vulnerable publicly, it means you're confident enough to do so. And then you also realize that you're enough and that people are going to love you, even if you aren't perfect. And I mean, I could go on and on about that. So yeah, be brave, do epic shit just means like, do something that makes you a little bit uncomfortable outside your comfort zone, because that's where meaning lies in life. And do epic shit means whatever that is, take on a challenge, do hard things, because you really find out who you are and what your expectations are out of life whenever you're pushing yourself just a little bit, whenever you're pushing yourself to those edges. Because if you never get to the edge, you're never going to know what you're capable of. And you're never going to know that there's so much more in there than you ever thought you had.
Mm-hmm. And let's say for somebody who is scared of getting out of that comfort zone, are there any books or anything that you've run into that would help somebody get out of that?
The first book, there's tons of books, but the first book I would recommend is called Mindset by Carol Dweck, and it's about fixed versus growth mindset. And for those of you listening who aren't familiar, so a fixed mindset is or someone with a fixed mindset is somebody thinks that their results or outcomes are validation or proof that they are good or they aren't good. So an example would be a test score. If you get an A on the test, that's proof that you're good. If you don't get an A on the test, it's proof that you're not smart. Or like in a race, if you get on the podium or get a certain time, that's proof that you're fast. But if you don't get that time, it means you're not fast. No, that's not right. And so growth mindset is focusing more on the process and the belief that you can always improve. So they're not looking at, people with a growth mindset aren't looking at their outcomes as a defining thing as to who they are and what they're capable of. It's just a moment in time to show them that they have the opportunity to continue working at something. And how we talk to ourselves and how we talk to kids, especially, is super important in this regard. And like saying things like, "Oh, you're so talented. Oh, you're so smart." When somebody does something really well, or "Oh, you're so fast," that's contributing to the fixed mindset, because now if they don't do well on something, then that they feel like they're not smart, and then they're afraid to even try because they might show the world that they're not smart. So if you can definitely read that book, because it goes a lot deeper into that, but if you can figure out if that's what's holding you back, and I bet that is what it holds back a lot of people, is that they're afraid that there's going to be validation that they're one way or another, and instead they need to focus on believing in the fact that you can always grow and improve, and that's what really matters, is your effort.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like that. I have read Carol Dweck's book, and I absolutely loved it. And the one part that I took away from it is, that people with the fixed mindset technically start thinking that if they have to put effort in, then it means that they're not good at it. When realistically, if you have the growth mindset, then you always have to put in effort no matter how good you are. And that's technically like what you need if you want to excel,
Yeah, for sure. Like in some of the races, I used to hate it when girls would say, "Oh, I didn't even train for this," and they would win the race. But then I knew that they were lying, and
Yeah.
because we reward people for not, quote, working hard, but I think that's changing.
Yeah. For the better, I guess.
Yeah.
Cool. One last question I've got for you. I tend to listen to podcasts when I'm out there running or doing something physical, just got the earbuds in. If
Your
somebody,
crazy hikes
yeah, exactly,
with your
right?
45-pound backpack.
Yeah, totally. That was too heavy, too much water. But if somebody out there is listening to this podcast while they're running or while they're mountain biking or something, and it's difficult, what would your word of advice be to keep going?
I would say embrace the difficulty, because if it's hard, that's good. If it's easy, that's not good, because hard things are what are going to teach you who you are, and overcoming hard things and pushing through them is what's going to make you stronger. So keep going.
Crazy. Yeah. Well, you must be super strong considering your track record there. But I just want to thank you for being here with me, Sonya. That was great.
Thanks so much.
Absolutely. I'm sure we'll talk soon.